Welcome to The New Next, a podcast that addresses current events and how they will impact the future. Co-hosted by the inquisitive public speaking champion, Mike McVeigh, and energy, economics, and technology expert, Matt Jensen. Join us as we explore all things energy, economic, tech, and political, and how they will affect our future. Hey, Matt.
Hey, Mike.
Thank you.
For what?
For being an amazing person that I've gotten to learn a lot more about energy and finance and stuff around the world. I'm still not big on reading articles and watching the news for various reasons. Like, I kind of want to be happy every day, or at least have that option. But you have definitely challenged me over the past 6 months to really have a good idea on kind of that things aren't necessarily always as they seem. And speaking of that, can you believe it's been 6 months since I first joined the podcast?
Yeah, I know. It's crazy. But it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. I mean, who knew that talking about coal versus solar energy would actually be something I would bring up in conversations with people that I generally talk about sports with. And I'm not joking. My wife, I actually, after coming back from lunch the other day, we were talking about how coal has increased its production over the pandemic, and a lot of the things we do to shoot ourselves in the foot. So thank you, Matt. I appreciate you letting me be on board for this project.
Well,
and as we
geopolitics are kind of like a sport, but between nations. So
yeah, it's kind of like what Yakov Smirnoff used to say in his joke, that, you know, in Russia, 3 strikes mean you're really out. And I would do the accent, but I'm afraid that all of our Russian listeners are going to be upset with me. And I want our Russian fans to, you know, all 0 of them right now. But we are nearing our 100th episode, and we do want to encourage people that maybe there's a subject that you think we haven't talked about. Well, we probably have. So go back and listen to those if you're able. And we want to let you know we appreciate you being a fan.
Yeah. And if there are topics, look in the show notes for our question submission webpage. So if there's stuff that you would like us to talk about, we'll get to it eventually. So we'll probably start doing on the podcast soon, more of a mailbag episode.
Woo! Those are my favorite episodes on podcasts.
Yeah. So keep on the questions.
Absolutely.
Keep them coming.
And speaking of Yakov Smirnoff, Russia, Ukraine, everybody's second favorite thing to talk about. Matt, is that even still going on, or that's pretty much ended now, right? Because I mean, gas prices are lowering. We're getting products back in our stores and stuff. So Russia and Ukraine probably isn't even happening anymore, right?
Yeah, I wish it was over. So it just seems to get accelerated. We recently learned back in, you know, we've kind of, I guess, probably predicted a lot of the stuff going on this podcast, the follies, and then also what we talked about, I think in February, was about a specific deal that made most sense for us, is letting, you know, basically Crimea and Donbass, the regions that had voted to secede from Ukraine, become a part of Russia, and how that would basically prevent the mass bloodshed and destruction of the country, and then also the ancillary effects throughout the global geopolitical and trade system. But so, you know, what we were talking about, we recently found out that there was actually a deal for that to happen back in April. And
yeah, our good friend Boris Johnson, who's currently not our friend or really that good. However, Boris, if you want to talk on this podcast to explain your side, just contact Matt at his email. Look in the show notes. Yeah, it looks like Boris Johnson kind of got in the way and prevented potentially bloodshed and other supply issues, as well as energy prices rising and stuff. So good job, man. One person can change the world, just not in the way we want.
Yeah, it's interesting that Russia had basically agreed to hold part of Donbass and Crimea, which they already held, and would withdraw from the rest of the country back in April. And the West kind of got in the way, said no go, and here we are today. So it's unfortunate that something that could have ended really quickly has prolonged so long. And just, I mean, what, 50 billion maybe in weapons so far? That's like, I think, more than Russia spends in a year that's been given to fight the Russians with the Ukraine. And maybe I think I don't know about Ukrainians, but with Russia, I think about over 50,000 of their soldiers have died. It's just I don't know, war is messy, and this is very unfortunate.
Yeah. And I take maybe a little bit more cynical of a side right now, because it does infuriate me that simple decisions can really impact the world. And we see something similar historically to Neville Chamberlain with World War II, where literally swore to all the people in England and all the other powers and stuff like, no, Adolf Hitler's a great guy. You just got to get to know him first. I mean, this isn't a joke. That's literally what allowed for Germany to get in some of its places. And now Boris just kind of being in there being like, hey guys, you really want to do it this way?
Yeah, let's keep it going.
So, I mean, I will say again, parents, just think your children could be the next one to extend in a war that was unnecessary, other than ego.
Yeah, it's like I think we get these obsessions sometimes of, especially in our like Western media cycle, of wanting to remove certain foreign leaders. And the U.S. is, you can go look online. I'm sure Wikipedia has something about all the different countries that we've overthrown throughout all the years. But I think that they saw an opportunity to get Putin out. And, unfortunately, I think the opposite's happened. He's consolidated his war. This war seems to be very popular in Russia, and they don't really have access to Western media, which says the exact opposite. So it's really, like it reminds me a lot about Iraq. And Iraq's historically been Sunnis, Shiites, and then the Kurds in the north of Iraq. And granted, Saddam wasn't a good guy, but he was able to basically have all those three coalitions and have stability in the country. And when we went to war with him, I don't think that there was really a thought about where this goes. Like, what's the end game on this? Like, it was, Saddam was really put up as an ideological figure, but after the war and the U.S. had their influence, we basically just put in one of, I think it was a Shiite that took over. And, you kind of go in the same cycle where, and try to do it in Syria too, but I just don't really necessarily think there's always an end game in this. And you kind of get fixated on trying to remove some of these people without thinking about the amount of bloodshed and the additional negative effects, the second and third degree effects that come off from foreign policy. But it's us basically funding Ukraine against the Russians without, like, I'm not sure what the strategy is. So.
Yeah. And I think this kind of points to something that's a recurring topic on this podcast, that the unintended consequences of the decisions made. And we see that maybe more clearly in other areas, but this is also something that, we were happy about this was a breaking news story for about a month. And then we kind of just got sick of it. And now we're still dealing with it. And they're even talking about this winter will be really interesting to see how everything will kind of handle, because Russia typically has a good history when it comes to wintertime on fighting its battles. And it'll be interesting to see if energy costs are going to continue to rise overall. We've talked about over the past summer about how prices have finally kind of come down to more manageable needs, but it wouldn't be surprising.
Not natural gas.
Yeah, not natural gas. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see all of our energy costs go up this winter as well, specifically because of Russia and Ukraine. And when we hit the 1 year anniversary in February, it's going to be a little bit more painful than it is right now to all the different costs that we have.
Well, it's really interesting, like with oil specifically. So in the U.S., like for instance, OPEC, which we've talked about is basically a cartel. They've said that they want $100 oil, so they'll cut down production. They just had a 100,000 barrel a day production cut, and in the U.S., we're about 50% of the lowest 5-year average in terms of oil storage. So it's been kind of interesting to see the oil market, because I don't think it's necessarily based on fundamentals, but natural gas hit over $10 MCF, which we haven't seen since like 2011. And like I think it was today or yesterday, Russia cut off the Nord Stream 1 pipeline gas to Germany, which I think delivers at least 30% of their natural gas. And they came out and said that this is a bargaining chip to get what they want out of the war. So what we've talked about a lot is that there's just this assumption that even though you're at war with a country, that Russia would still sell them gas. But they're making, a lot more money than they were previously. And it's, the Western sanctions really haven't worked. So you have a lot of examples of Russia still selling their oil in tankers where they go to the UAE or Saudi Arabia, and they either get blended with other stuff, or they basically will use that, like Saudi and UAE will use that for domestic energy needs and then export more of their own goods.
Right.
So it's just really, it's not thought out well. And the G7 decided kind of like the geniuses in the room in recent days to try to set a oil price cap for, using what we've talked about before, the London insurance tanker or insurance, basically cutting off the ability to insure Russian crude, and using that as leverage so that other foreign countries would only be able to pay up to like $60 a barrel for Russian crude. And it pissed them off. So now the gas is cut off. And I just am, always bewildered of the lack of kind of understanding some of the politicians have of the situation that they're in.
Yeah.
And kind of like the end effects on their citizens. You're already in a gas rationing phase before the pipeline's cut off. And I mean, it's just what's happened over the last 6+ months with global food flows. We talked about like sunflower oil production being way down, wheat exports being way down from, the world's breadbasket there in Russia and Ukraine, the gas disruptions, fertilizer basically being cut off. The U.S. is a big user of Russian fertilizer. So it's just, it's interesting to see. It's been very interesting to watch this from, my background and stuff, but it's really interesting to see the ideology that's pushed a lot of this stuff without kind of having a protective backstop to make sure that they can't do this. It's basically like, you can't use energy as a weapon, but while we're shooting you. So
yeah, it's all's fair in love and war.
Yeah, totally.
And that you brought up something that we haven't really talked about much on the podcast. I mean, we mentioned that you did go overseas to work on your master's degree and stuff. Have you checked in with like any of your friends over the past 6 months who are still over in Europe and stuff, and seeing how they kind of been reacting to the various things that have been happening?
Yeah, we've been talking a lot, and it's the ones that we've talked about in a political sense are just like, this has been a long period of follies and failures from politicians really, understanding the geopolitics within it and not preparing for it too. So one of my friends who's a huge advocate for green energy and is living in Germany, he was just basically like, this is they really messed up, and just there's a lack, I think, of understanding on a fundamental level the complexities of creating energy. And it's, my friends over there are all, like make good money. So they're kind of in a different position.
Right.
But it's still, when you're talking about the UK and stuff, basically energy prices like up 10 times for businesses in certain areas from last year, like double to triple the price for homes. German energy prices here are just insane, just really kind of troubling to look at. And then you have, it's just kind of like the expectation is that you can have a call to arms where you're like, well, stop taking long showers, stop doing all this stuff that you normally do, and expecting a lot of people to really like care. It's kind of unfortunate that you can't do it, but I think a lot of the people blame the people that aren't to blame for putting or creating this situation are the ones that typically have to bear the brunt of the costs for the inaction. And, I like California and kind of Nevada right now are going through a massive heat wave, Arizona. So California came out a couple days ago and was basically asking people to not charge their cars, their EVs, to reduce energy usage and stuff like that. And what I've been watching the last 2 days is that they haven't been doing that. So a couple of years ago, they had rolling blackouts, and it was like this big to do because the grid essentially failed. And I haven't seen if that's happened yet while we're recording this, but it's kind of a similar scenario back then too, where it's just not, there's just not enough energy to go around, and building out the grid globally to when you're trying to transition from things takes time,
Right.
and you just can't turn something off and then build massive infrastructure within 5 days. So
Yeah, and I guess that's kind of interesting to me that California has been doing so well in compliance, because we've just had about 2 years, and granted, it's
they're
scattered
not doing
worldwide.
well in compliance.
Okay, good. I mean, bad, but
Yeah.
it's like we've been in a 2-year test where the world has not enjoyed the restrictions that we've asked them to partake in because of COVID. And now just saying, like, right when COVID's kind of at least now manageable, we're saying, oh, by the way, don't do all these other things that you're in a habit of doing. Maybe even more so because you have been staying locked up in your house and stuff. So I think that's where, I know I reference World War II a lot, but there's so many things that happened in World War II that really did affect the world in a different way. And you hear about Britain specifically going through the different bombings and how they had to save electricity and when they could do certain things at times a day and everything. And there was a spirit that I want to say at least Americans and some other countries were like, yeah, if we were going through the same thing, we would do the same thing. But from what we've seen over the past couple of years, we might not do the things necessary to really make the world better, to take those small sacrifices. And
well, I think it's different when someone's shooting at you personally.
Well, I would hope so. But that's part of where discipline comes in, right? It's not reaction. It's, discipline's proaction as opposed to reaction. So, yeah, I mean, it's a sucky situation all around. And,
yeah. And I wonder if I lived in California or still lived in Seattle, or New York, if I would have more animosity to politicians had I lived there. Like, we didn't really have, both you and I took a lot of steps, to protect the surroundings during COVID and stuff, but that was optional for us.
mm-hmm.
Like, we didn't really have a lot of restrictions here. So
Heck, even on top of that, even the few restrictions out there, if we would have broken it, basically in Oklahoma, no one cares. I mean, that's like we see a cook or something coughing without a mask, and it's like, okay, well, I just know I'm not going to go back to that restaurant. But
I don't think I carry the animosity towards politicians like certain other people probably do in the United States right now.
Yeah.
Like, it's just kind of it's a really hard job. And I think a lot of people aren't really qualified for it. And, part of that too is there's not a lot of support to get people qualified and really make quality non-political decisions when you're in there. So,
well, I want to kind of mention on the side, and you've hinted at it, if you give a couple examples, but just looking through some of these articles that we've been basing our information on, and it goes back as far as June, and it says new record high for this kind of payment, new record high a month later for a completely different area. And France and Germany in particular are just getting hit with every record high in pretty much every single market that seems to be a market for.
Yeah.
And that's where I kind of am both scared and curious on how some of that's going to leak over to the U.S., especially with the holidays.
Well, I think really where it's leaked is the kind of arbitrage opportunity to take North American gas or gas from the U.S., put it on ships and send it to Europe where that's possible.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the prices are just so much more expensive there that's really caused So I think before this year we exported, or in 2021, I think we exported about 5% of our produced gas, natural gas, over the seas, and I think that's over 15% now.
Goodness.
So you're talking about a huge jump without really much additional gas production here. And here in the US, we're really, kind of our production is like one of the things I was talking about with one of my European friends too, was he was kind of asking if we're able to produce more gas. And it's kind of like we have a problem here now where we have a lot of gas in not necessarily the place that you need it. So, not having the pipelines that can move it out of the country kind of create a lot of issues. And I think there's been a lot of people that really grasping at straws, both from, negotiating with Iran and Venezuela, but also hoping that Qatar, which is building a lot of LNG facilities now, could just have that built right away. But you're looking at 5 to 10 years to really build out the capacity to displace us. And it's just, it's not something that you can really snap the fingers to do.
Right.
So it's just, it's a complicated time. And like for here, that means higher electricity prices and higher heating prices because of higher natural gas. So I think it has hit here. Like I've seen my bills go up, and and you probably have too. I just kind of imagine what the effect like that has on certain people that just really can't afford it. So I think a lot of people are praying.
If you would like to learn more about the New Next podcast, find us at thenewnextpodcast.com, where you can suggest a topic you would like for us to cover. If you enjoyed what you heard, share the podcast, tell a friend about it, or rate us with 5 stars.